Back with more college football coverage. I told you in the last video that there was an intent for Brendan Sorsby to prepare for the supplemental draft that the NFL would hold in very special and rare situations. That was a complete and total fabrication. To add yet another turn of events to what has been a long-standing scandal, quite frankly, with Brendan Sorsby, with the entire sports gambling evidence levied against him, and stuff that he also admitted to hurt his cause in a way even further, which prompted the NCAA to deny him eligibility in the first place. Of course, by this point, it got reversed. The injunction was granted to him, and he very well could have played. Feeling that the alternative options were shrinking, and feeling the pressure and the heat from other schools in the Big 12, from his own program at Texas Tech now, and from a lot of higher-ups who were quite literally in shambles, losing games in matches against other opponents from other major conferences in college sports, to opt out of that contract entirely, take his talents elsewhere. He didn't have to go home, but he had to get out of Lubbock, Texas, as soon as possible. And thus, we left off with Sorsby intending to enter his name into the Sweepstakes. Now, the timing of the draft that I initially alluded to was incorrect. It would have been held in July at some point rather than the 2 days that I was alluding to. That was incorrect information. So I will apologize for that. In the grand scheme of things, the NFL has the executive order to determine whether or not they will hold a supplemental draft in any year under this current CBA. And as a result of that, they are very much wielding that power. On the one hand, you can understand it, and on the other, some of it could very much come off as hypocritical. The language that they've laid down is zero tolerance. And when you have a man in Brendan Sorsby doing the stuff that he admitted to doing, over 9,000 bets, worth over $90,000, it makes it very hard for a team to be convinced that we can trust the quarterback of the team to lead us in a way that is reflective of integrity in the sport. And so as a result, per multiple sources here earlier in the week, it was stated that, quote, quarterback Brendan Sorsby will not play in the NFL in 2026 as the league has elected not to hold a supplemental draft. The NFL's decision came down to its right to decide whether to hold a supplemental draft, per the collective bargaining agreement, as league officials said they believed it would ultimately become a distraction to teams as they began training camps. End quote. From that perspective, yeah, if that was the only logic that they used here, yeah, it would be a complete and utter distraction. Like, we are in OTA season right now. Practices are going to start ramping up. People are starting to prepare for the preseason as early as right now, as we get our game plan sorted out and everything like that. The last thing we have Tom for is drama, quite frankly. And it's already bad enough when it happens on an internal team level, where you have people quarreling with each other and things like that. That'd already be a tough situation to overcome and have to address as an organization. You bring in even more outside noise with something like this, when Sorsby himself, if he were to have been brought in at this time, you literally are months behind on work. Months behind. Way further than the component of him bringing all this baggage in. Like, we actively have to get straight into it. You have to try to build as much team chemistry as possible, on top of recognizing all the plays in the playbook, mastering a good percentage of plays in the playbook, and then executing at a high level in practices and then scrimmages, and then the game in just a matter of a couple months. That is not an easy task whatsoever. Not to mention the amount of questions that the organization, a front office member, an owner would have to answer in regards to the practices that Sorsby illegally committed during his time in college. And how optically bad that could look in the NFL if he truly had not learned a thing. He, again, went to rehab for a month-long stint. He has written several documents that he is trying to better himself from something that became an addiction. And that can be admirable. But if there is no sign of him actually making those strides, we don't know that right now. All people can do is still assume that he is very much actively engaged in trying to violate these bylaws. We have no way of knowing. We're still too early in this cycle to determine if there's been a marked change in behavior for him. It's unfortunate in Brendan Sorsby's position. Again, you can't be doing any of this stuff, but this is not the first time that a player who has been alleged to be involved in sports gambling face the ultimate penalties and struggle to really find their footing in a professional league. Of course, the scenario that was referenced several times over in previous articles on this was the one that former college quarterback Hunter Deckers faced, as that was the last time a specific quarterback dealt with a gambling issue of this magnitude. And as a result, he was barred from ever playing college ball again. I believe that he took his talents to the UFL, but hasn't really been able to produce all that well in the spring league to elevate up to the pros. And even if he were to be able to, I'm sure that is something that the NFL would try to monitor and figure out, hey, are we actually willing to take a chance on this guy despite all of the things that happened? And I believe this case was in like 2022 or 2023, they mentioned. So that would be the reference point. And the same thing ended up happening there. We said it in the last video. The avenues that Sorsby could take were completely limited, as he etched his own name out of the granted injunction by reversing the court decision and withdrawing the entire case, believing that he had a 100% chance to make it to the NFL. In all honesty, that could be where one might say, hey, he screwed up. Quite frankly. Like, it just was never going to be a guarantee. Per this quote, and as other people would put it, per CBS Sports, there was no guarantee that Sorsby would have been selected even if the NFL held a supplemental draft. While his talent makes him one of the most tantalizing quarterbacks in his class, the Texas Tech signal caller carries the kind of baggage that could have led teams to pass on him. End quote. So again, just obvious for obvious reasons. Like, you still are taking a huge risk by selecting him, and that had been echoed many times. So it was not just automatic that as soon as he entered his name, he was going to be accepted, and teams would put forth an optimal bid for him. Again, the process works in that you put up a specific pick, I guess, accompanying the round, and if you outright have it, kind of like an auction system, you'll be called up and you'll have the rights to that player. That's how it typically works, while losing the adjacent pick that you would have for the same round in the actual draft. Which means you better have multiple picks in that round if you don't want to lose a valuable asset later. So again, there are real implications when it comes to the supplemental draft, even though it is rarely used. There's a lot to consider there, on top of all the outside noise that he is bringing with him. Like, again, the report that all 32 teams were lining up at the door to take a chance on Brendan Sorsby, that in and of itself was not true. But even amongst the few teams who realistically had a chance to get him, you're still asking a whole hell of a lot. And then trying to get the media as well to be on his side in this entire equation. The local media, that is. Not even the national media. Because it would, frankly, start there. How awkward would those conversations be to have to navigate that? And they are most certainly going to want to get to the bottom of the entire equation. It's just not something that you can have happen, truly. But you had that wear off in college, and the UFL actually ended their season a couple days before his intended resolution that the representation for him put forth, as well as the time of which he actually put out his, petition for entry. All of that came far earlier. The season is already wrapped up to this point. So even when we mentioned Deckers being in the UFL, well, the season's done. That is just a complete no-go. You can't turn in that direction. It's already over. The best you could hope for is to join them in the offseason, which is likely going to be in the winter, as they then prepare for spring ball next year, with the draft happening in the midst of that regular season, which would still be just non-option entirely. Of course, as the NFL would say in a letter, which I'll get to in a second as well, and as other people have been saying, he could also sit out. But again, a quarterback of his intended, a quarterback of his projected caliber, let's put it like that, who was supposed to be a first-round talent if he were to have entered in the actual draft cycle in 2026, and a guy who was still seen as a potential day 2 pick next year, if he decides to go for it again, and he does not, pursue anything further with it. Why would you want to ruin those chances, losing all of those, all of that rhythm, honestly, and all the repetition that you would need as a quarterback to make sure that when you're putting all this stuff on tape, it's just like clockwork. You're not missing a step at all. The rust of a quarterback, let alone any player, sitting out for that much time, even if it just seems like, oh, it's a year. No, there is a real rust there. Again, he's a young player. You would still think that it may not affect him all that much. And even then, you'd be totally wrong. Having that real experience out on the field matters. The talent alone can only get you so far. And when you continue to elevate into higher levels of play at any position in football, you have to build that routine. Because that, in a way, although it can be monotonous, sticking to it is what can set you apart, in theory, from the rest of the competition. So Sorsby, even if he were to take that option, it's like it would not be the most optimal decision in the world for him personally and on the level of ability. Because he could very easily, in a year's time span, lose all of that swiftly. Like that is just... Then you have to get out there 12 months later and try to recapture that. And while he may be able to with his youth in play, it is not as simple as it may seem. So, once again, another non-option. And of course, there would be a few more alternatives, but all of them do not compare to instantly. Now, with him not having an NIL deal anymore, instantly going to the most prolific sports league in the world, quite frankly, and especially in this nation, to pick back up on that income, on top of also playing the sport that you love, that would be the ideal solution for Brendan Sorsby. And again, because the NFL holds the rights to determine whether or not they want to hold a supplemental draft, they denied it. They wanted a real conviction, honestly, from Brendan Sorsby in his letter of intent and entry. Like the entire time, it feels in ways like he had done that before. But, of course, all of the actions that they had seen from afar, especially when it comes to the entire legal process, it rubbed them a totally different way. And that's essentially the crux of what this letter gets into. Now, you gotta stick with it. It's a long one. But this comes from Lawrence P. Ferrazzani Jr., the general counsel of the NFL Management Council. And it was denied on June 23rd. This is the letter that was actually sent to Brendan Sorsby. So I'll go through the entire thing and kind of, break down what was said here. So per USA Today Sports and other sources, this is what the letter said. Dear Mr. Sorsby, we are in receipt of your petition for special eligibility dated June 16th, 2026. As announced earlier today, the league has elected not to conduct a supplemental draft this year. Under our collective bargaining agreement, the league retains sole discretion to determine whether it is appropriate to conduct a supplemental draft in any given year. The league has not conducted such a draft for several years, and prior to your submission, the league had no plans to do so this year, as no other player has sought entry. Your petition filed 3 business days before the deadline, without any supporting information or documentation, and only after abandoning your recent litigation efforts to avoid NCAA sanctions, does not provide a basis for the league to alter those plans. The issues presented by your petition are too significant and too closely tied to the league's core integrity interests to permit meaningful review within the timeline presented. The sole reasons identified in your petition for seeking entry into the supplemental draft are that you have been declared ineligible by the NCAA, have exhausted all of your avenues to continue in the NCAA, and want to now play in the NFL. The petition provides no information regarding the basis for or timing of the NCAA's decision. Public sources, however, indicate that in May 2026, the NCAA issued a determination declaring you permanently ineligible from participation in college athletics based on a sustained pattern of improper activity, gambling activity, during your collegiate career at 3 different universities. The league does not have the complete record of the NCAA's investigation, and you did not provide any such materials with your petition. Available information nonetheless indicates that, over the course of your collegiate career, you knowingly engaged in repeated and significant violations of NCAA rules designed to preserve the integrity of athletic competition. Reported conduct includes placing wagers on your own team and teammates, and to avoid detection, establishing or funding accounts in the names of intermediaries who place bets on your behalf. There are also reports that you may have violated state criminal law. Your petition does not address these matters, nor does it demonstrate accountability for your conduct or indicate whether or how you would adhere to the league's rules and policies governing the integrity of competition. Instead, even after receiving notice of the NCAA's decision rescinding your college eligibility in May, you sought to avoid the consequences of that determination through litigation rather than accepting responsibility for your actions, and you pursued entry into the NFL only after abandoning those efforts. As Commissioner Goodell has emphasized, participation in the NFL is a privilege that carries with it significant responsibilities, including accountability. By all accounts, you are a talented player with the potential for future success. We encourage you to focus on preparing for possible entry into the NFL through the 2027 NFL Annual Draft. End quote. Yeah, so that was the entire letter right there. And, hey, you can feel at times the veracity in that statement. I mean, some of the stuff that was said here, he apparently did not take accountability at all for what he did and admitted to in other forms of justice in this letter whatsoever. And they, simply put, were not taking that at all. It does read that way. Through every hurdle here, it has all been through the courts. We're going to fight it. I acknowledge that I may have done some wrong, but we're going to fight this case to ensure that my eligibility is secure and stable enough to give me at least another year to play. That was the idea. Now again, he's got a strong litigation team beside him with Jeffrey Kessler flanking him. A name that, again, people do not want to hear, whether it be the NCAA or NFL, with his track record that has been well documented in that I kind of went through a little bit in previous recaps. Like, he does understand what he's doing to a point, but again, we're relying on that here, and we're not facing the issue directly. They went through some of the initial reports, even though they admit that they didn't have full access to the investigation that the NCAA had. A lot of the information is public, and they cite some of that there. Things that apparently Sorsby failed to mention. It was all about trying to get into the league, stating his case for making the league, and, just sticking to that specific territory here. And also, understanding that, hey, this is kind of a desperation move. The avenues that I would have anticipated taking my talents to, they've dried up. They've dried up. I don't have many places to turn. In ways, I might need it. Now, again, it's a tricky situation. Because on the one hand, that is just a damning spot to be in. When you do think about it, Sorsby really does not have anywhere else to turn. That is the truth of the matter. This was the only bona fide avenue he really had to select. And it's just off the table like that. On the other hand, with some of the stuff they said, if more players were involved, that would, potentially help just a little bit. No other player has made it a point to rally for a supplemental draft this year. No other player has deemed it necessary to call for one, just to help their chances of getting in the league out. No one else. just Sorsby, and that is already enough to have caused the media storm over virtually the past few weeks. That name in and of itself has done all this. That's just not the kind of pressure that, we would want in a situation like this. So you got to call it off. And with the actions that you admitted to in real time, you brought it on yourself. In a way, we have no tolerance for sports gambling at all. That is the rule. And to make a special exception just for you could in ways set a bad example to other athletes in the lower levels and even in the pros themselves to be influenced by that. That just sets a bad precedent that no one would want to be a part of. So we have to lay down our foot somewhere and we have to call it. Simply put. So from that standpoint, they shut Sorsby down. They don't have any place for it in their game amongst the players. They want to make sure that everyone out there on the field is competing as fairly as possible and as ethically as possible. And if it were that simple, if, that was, genuinely the main thing here, and there wasn't any other context, from that standpoint, you could get what the NFL is saying. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what the people are asking for. You don't want this driven by all of these ulterior motives and all of these other odds and bets and things like that. You don't want these games dictated by that. You want to see a purely clean game in all its randomness and all its glory play out in real time until that clock hits triple zeros or that bottom of the ninth finishes up. All around, man. That's what the fans would be clamoring for. Just fairness and honesty. Not influenced by any of these gambling trends or any of these, substance abuse trends. All the like. It just goes against the very nature of what the league is trying to promote. In ways. And then you have the alternative conversation to this, because yes, there should be zero tolerance for the players out there doing any of this in any realm. It is always a conflict of interest to have a player actively on a team or actively in a sport betting, because it does give off the message that, hey, maybe something fishy is truly going on here. And we as fans are not going to stand for it. So we will jump ship and move elsewhere. From that standpoint, you could understand where they are coming from. However, the league themselves aren't necessarily impervious of blame and potentially some responsibility of their own. Because in ways, while, they're getting after Sorsby here, and they should, because, you have to lay down the law here at the same time, the idea of them talking about responsibilities and accountability at the same time, it's like it can come off as disingenuous. Seeing what we see virtually every Sunday, and sometimes Monday, sometimes Tuesday, rarely, but sometimes Wednesday, Thursdays, sometimes Fridays, and sometimes Saturdays. When it comes to the sports gambling thing. I mean, it has literally gotten to the point where it took over Red Zone, which was commercial free, and now it no longer is, to try to get fans more immersed into the game, or at least attract an audience of people who may not necessarily be invested in the sport otherwise, than just to run through a good sum of money on a day-to-day basis at times for the more extreme people, the people who are addicted to sports betting, to spend their money on that, on all the different prop bets and parlays and things of that nature, and go ballistic. You have it promoted on Red Zone. You have working sponsorships with FanDuel, with DraftKings, Bets 365, all these different sites, Underdog Sports, all of it, working relationships, and also, not to mention, the Caesars Sportsbook in Las Vegas, generally handling all of that and running it from their base in Las Vegas. So the NFL themselves, we cannot have the players do it. And again, I agree, it should not be that way. But we can also allow fans to spend exorbitant amounts of money doing exactly that. We can have all of these working relationships with these sports betting sites and ambassadors to bring more of an audience to the game that may not necessarily be tied to the sport itself, but might solely be interested at times in just the betting aspect of things. Just for a fun time. Really? And then, not to mention, with the way that some of these work, even if they themselves aren't actively betting, because it would be illegal, some of the same athletes will be put on these commercials, present and former, like your Bryson DeChambeau's, like your Will Compton and Taylor Wands, getting on these commercials. LeBron James promoting on these commercials for DraftKings and the like, these betting apps and props for fans to invest in. So there is a lot of irony in that. And, you know, again, like, you do want Sorsby to truly grow out of that phase and change that around before entering the NFL. But this is kind of the thing that Kessler is getting into, and why they are still actively pursuing going against this. Because he feels that this does violate some of the clauses that have been implemented over time. He genuinely believes that. And on his account, finds it a little unfair that Sorsby, who is 22 years old, is subject to this power play and this selective nature about the NFL coming after him while actively being unwilling to do anything to distance the relationships they have with these sports betting sites, knowing just how much it has grown over the years. Like, you're going to just go on an all-out aerial assault against this 22-year-old kid while you actively are in partnership with mammoths of organizations in the sports betting industry as a whole. No. We're not going to take a liking to that. We will fight this in court. That's where Kessler stands at. So again, Kessler typically is an individual that performs very well against these leagues. And is just not a person that people even want you to bring up around them. That's how drastic this gets. So Sorsby, even if the odds of him potentially winning that are low still, like, they're going for it. They're trying to levy this now, and, you do like your odds with having Kessler on your side, as he once again attempts to, fight this through the legal process. Because with a report yesterday, it still remains possibly one of the only ways, if not the only feasible way, you can get into the league early, other than waiting until 2027. Because as another report yesterday, as of the recording of this video, stated, quote, "Another door has closed for Brendan Sorsby's immediate football future, as the CFL said Friday that the quarterback will not be allowed to join any of its teams for the upcoming season. Upholding the integrity of the league and ensuring fair competition are paramount to the CFL," the CFL said in a statement to USA Today. "The allegations involving Brendan Sorsby are serious and concerning. At this time, the CFL will not register a contract for him, and no team will be permitted to add him to its negotiation list." End quote. So the CFL, a league that is more niche compared to the NFL, for a number of obvious reasons, it does not nearly get the same kind of traction on a national stage. But of course, there is an awareness that the league occurs. And there have been examples of CFL players transitioning over to the NFL. There have been occasions where the NFL has had former players occasionally go to the CFL for maybe a brief stint of time, either to resuscitate their career or just ride out their last leg of a career. You generally never see players in their prime transitioning over to the CFL and vice versa, and you don't see a player typically go straight from college to try to enter a CFL team. Now again, Sorsby is just, again, trying to throw darts at the wall here. Like, we are really just trying to figure out how can he stay on the field for a year in between not playing in college and trying to shore up for the NFL draft. Is the NFL still stated that, hey, they admit he's got the talent for it. They admit that he's got the talent for it and that he should still enter next year. But we're just wielding around this power now to dangle it over him and bar him from entering any time before that. It's just, like, when you look at it from that full lens perspective, it can be a little bit wild. The CFL generally is not going to get the same kind of attention. And so from their perspective, them denying it is not anything to really be surprised by. Why would a league that barely brings in the same kind of revenue and barely has the exposure compared to the billions-dollar league in the NFL, as much as that is worth, by comparison, why would they bring over a player in Brendan Sorsby coming from college with that much attention on him right now, knowing that even the players who are the most deserving of attention in that league through their elite play and their hard work are not going to nearly accrue the same kind of coverage. It's not worth it, and it would be unfair to virtually everybody else in every other locker room in that league. They could not do it. So you have to understand where they're coming from there. But once more, it severely limits his options. From all of what I've read and seen, it does look like he is still trying to fight it. Like he is still trying to go immediately after the NFL to get an optimal decision. Maybe just simply force them to run a supplemental league at the end of the day, or find some sort of avenue for an earlier entry. If this is something that is going to go all the way to a full trial, it could get very dangerous. I mean, in that situation, like both sides are not going to pull their punches at all. At all. Like the NFL will do as best as they can to uphold their specific practices and everything there. But Kessler is still going to try to fight them hard. Like it is not going to be a cakewalk for either side if this does go any deeper. But for all we know right now, after it looked as though Sorsby was going to, actually play in college football this season after seemingly not, that changed. Now, he was in search of getting into the NFL, and it was not happening on their watch. Not with the zero tolerance policy they have created about the sports betting amongst the players and, I guess, staffers. So that would include coaches as well on these teams, despite actively promoting it. You could say passively or aggressively through different commercials, through the number of countless relationships they have with the sports betting sites, and with varying players, former and current, in other spots for, 15, 30-second ads, promoting it themselves. Yet, being targeted the second that they themselves may actually bet on the game. And again, it could be for good reason, but it's a walking contradiction to have sports betting up to this scale and then expect that you won't have at least a few players out of the wazoo attempt to circumvent the system. Then, you get as well into the letter with them saying he still got the talent. And that they'd still have interest in him if he were to join next year. But even then, even if he were to go through the natural process, the questions would still arise as maturity problems and leadership issues with real-world implications because of what he had already admitted to. As a result of that, Sorsby is still, as we kind of noted in the first place, despite all the inconsistency here, the NCAA flip-flopping the entire time, then having Cincinnati allegedly withhold the evidence, having Texas Tech, by the same measure, have to distance themselves because of the feedback and blowback that they got from potentially allowing him to suit up just for even a split second of time. And then the NFL having to see all of that on their end in trying to make a snap decision and judgment. It all leaves Brendan Sorsby still running, still trying to outrun that at all. In ways you can't. Again, like, especially when it comes to some of what I was saying in the previous recap, especially for a school like Texas Tech. Like, even if he's gone, even if, he does turn in a very stellar career, it's not something that's going to easily leave him. This is something that's going to constantly be a question, a frame of mind for several people to try to research into a little bit deeper. That is just how this is. So all this scrambling and virtually no real concrete option for Sorsby at this point, as he still has to just sit. It's got to be the hardest, I guess, one of the harder positions you could be in as an athlete, knowing that you want to compete at a high level and that you want to get your stock and your name further out there, knowing that you can't do any of that in the moment, that you have to sit out. Difference is, for Brendan Sorsby, comparative to an injury, comparative to a, lingering thought of retirement, compared to a personal matter, this is something that Sorsby, even in a phase of potential addiction, if this is how it is being treated, then it's real. You have to respect that. But he also had just as much control to come to a complete and total stop in commitment to these actions just as well. And in ways, again, as contradictory as it may seem, the NFL and Ferrazzani Jr. in that letter could have a point. That while he has admitted to these things, while he has come out with public apologies, he is genuinely going to have to sit himself down and take a look in the mirror, truly reflect on all of what had happened, come to the mindset that he could have very well been stuck in that cycle of addiction. But now, especially now, you are going to have to take control of that. And you are going to have to, on your own will, overcome that. It may take some help. It may take some guidance. But you have got to want that for yourself before anyone else can truly try to fight for you in the way that they have. Before any league can truly invest in you, Sorsby has to take that time for himself, to better himself first, because no one else can get him there if he does not want to put in the work to get himself there. That is the best thing that I could possibly say about this. Like, we don't know how a potential case between his representation in the NFL would end up right now. We don't know how other leagues or other organizations would go about potentially picking up Brendan Sorsby and allowing him to play. Like, I don't know if it's an all year round thing, for example, but like, there are some very lower, and I mean lower level alternatives for Sorsby if you look in semi-pro. Things like the Arena Football League and all those sorts of things are other options that he might still be trying to explore. We have no idea of that right now. That is the only conclusion that we can come to. Whatever may happen, Sorsby truly has to take those steps forward into becoming that improved individual he wants to be and remove all of those habits of sports gambling from himself that were ailing him during this time. That is the ultimate goal and has to be, in order for all else to seemingly go in a good direction for him. So that'll do it for this one. I wouldn't say that this is one that you would particularly enjoy, because it is, in that sense, just not completely tragic tale, but one that is obviously not one that would necessarily put you in a positive frame of mind completely. It's supposed to challenge you. It's supposed to make you think in several different ways. I don't think that hearing of an individual's options completely being closed out are anything that you would enjoy. And maybe in Sorsby's situation, you're not completely empathetic to it. Maybe you shouldn't be, given what he did. It's all subjective at the end of the day. But those are probably the things that you'd come away from this video with. And not necessarily being ecstatic at hearing that this happened to an individual, or hearing potentially that the league is facing yet another potential form of litigation as it just continues to pile up for them. There's a lot to take in there. But that is all that I have. Peace.